As it stands, chemtrails need little introduction, being the most believed in so-called conspiracy theory in the world today. In the almost 20 years since the trails began to mushroom in frequency, great numbers of people became alarmed, especially by the bewildering conflicts in the actual trails. Why do some cut off while one next to it goes a much further distance? How can they spread in a quarter hour from a tiny white line to a sheet the width of a small city? And why do we see one jet making the dense spreading trail while another seemingly right next to it may have nothing at all? It looks very much like a heavy spray in comparison, which triggered the alarms. But the official government position is they are just made of water vapor. Not swallowing that, many have tried to prove that the trails are made of a chemical. After 20 years, they have so far failed. Even when the EPA has shown water samples collected by school kids with ultra-high levels of aluminum, nanothreads, powder, the only response has been, well, we don't know where it came from. Well, isn't it their job to find out? Factory output certainly can't account for such results, but they don't even look up since the official position is it can't be from jets since all they emit is water vapor. Today we will succeed by showing not that the trails are a chemical, but by proving what they are not. We will prove they are not water vapor. No matter how deep the science behind it all is, the proof is so easy, a caveman kid can do it. So this video is primarily as a reference source for everyone to use and shows the method of proof anyone grade 3 and up can duplicate. The method will be shown with 3 examples of plane tracking for jets that trail versus those that don't. The first half of the video gives us the briefest history possible of the origin and most likely use of alleged chemtrails, building global weather control. After the demonstration of proof method, we will have a few examples of what can now be understood and explained. Know where modern progress on weather control got its start, we must travel back to the late 1800s. The enormous power of electricity was just being harnessed, and one of the greatest geniuses of all time, named Nikola Tesla, was attempting novel methods for altering the ionosphere, a layer of charged particles at the top of the atmosphere, like our skin on top of our muscles. His amazing work will be used almost 100 years later, as we will see. But the very first known attempt by man to alter the weather was made by an intelligent farmer with a very large property who tried to make low-lying clouds rain during a drought. He did it by setting fire to a long line of trees at the property edge. Prior to this, all man had was prayer, and nobody's sure when it worked. But progress stopped there for many decades until the end of World War II. The end of World War II saw dramatic, globe-straddling technologies developed, which were really godlike in their capacity or potential capacity. All of these were pushed to the absolute max by the military-industrial interests throughout the world. The jet engine, developed by the great German engineers, was the prototype. But within a few years it was replaced by superior designs, and this process has continued without any abatement to unbelievable levels this day. Another great technology that was developed was the liquid-fueled rocket engine, guided rocket, and it was from this technology by the same German engineers that we have utilized in order to develop the great capabilities of which we enjoy today. There can be no question that every ounce of money, manpower, mind power was put into the development. Now it's gone from globe straddling to interplanetary. Are there any other great breakthroughs that took place at this time? Everybody's favorite. But not content to rest on their laurels, within just a couple of years they were able to use it as a detonator, going off at the top right there, to make a much, much more powerful bomb, the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb. Unseen here is the electromagnetic pulse, which would have great potential and ramifications later on, and most people are aware of it today. Also, the first supercomputer was developed to make the calculations for the bomb itself. It was found subsequently that the EMP actually lifted the ionosphere, and as a result lifted the atmosphere underneath it, which would have great potential global weather control ramifications. The less exciting was the first cloud seeding, which actually started with smoke.
Using Schaefer-Langmuir techniques, the Army Signal Corps and Office of Naval Research began conducting many of these experiments. And a reaction set up which would cause real rain to fall. For the first time in all history, there is now open to man the possibility of exerting some control over the weather.
Unsaid here was the tremendous potency of even the earliest materials, where we see that the first attempts was using dry ice. Through the use of dry ice, they were actually able to convert an entire cloud bank into snow. The speed with which this all exploded into effect was enormous, unbelievable. And they so record it. The rapidity with which the CO2 seemed to affect the cloud was amazing, as though it almost exploded. The effect was so widespread and rapid. Does that sound familiar? By 1959, progress on electromagnetic and cloud seeding, cloud reaction inducing materials had progressed so far that the Department of Defense commissioned the #1 movie maker in the world to prepare a movie to help the American people get ready for what was coming. The focus would be not on global weather control, but on preventing a hurricane.
The world of tomorrow and the instruments of science which are shaping it may seem remote and fantastic, but yesterday's fantasies are becoming today. These future satellites will be the key to precise forecasting and control of weather. Let us project our present knowledge with a little imagination and speculate on how satellites might be used in future operations from a worldwide weather center. This is the master control room. Electronic maps and view screens display up-to-the-minute pictures of the weather around the Earth. Prediction charts have indicated that a powerful hurricane will begin forming today in the Atlantic Ocean. The electronic weather map shows an intense storm system building up about 1,000 miles due east of Miami, Florida. The controller calls for a close-up satellite view of the troubled area.
Coordinates: Coco 526, Yankee 2.5. Okay, controller.
At Weather Central, the control strategy is mapped out. A ridge of high pressure slants across the eastern United States between two low-pressure storm systems. If these two storm centers are intensified, the high will build up along the coast, forming a barrier that will turn the hurricane out to sea. With the touch of a button, the battle begins. On the ground, chemical cloud seeders begin to work the two storm areas. Robot planes seed the clouds from above. For a salvo of vapor rockets to be fired ahead of the path the hurricane is predicted to take. These artificial clouds will block the sun from evaporating more water to feed the hurricane. These artificial clouds will block the sun from evaporating more water to feed the hurricane. Equipped robot aircraft are dispatched immediately to release a high concentration of cloud seeding material into the fringes of the storm. Heavier seeding from the ground also helps to subdue the rain by spreading it over a wider area. The hurricane has stopped moving toward the coast, but is still intensifying. After hours of tension, the turning point is reached. Latest reports indicate the control strategy is successful. Is over. The danger has passed. The hurricane has been defeated, turned away from the land, and left to spend itself harmlessly far out at sea. In the world of tomorrow, weather control will enrich and safeguard our daily lives.
But after this movie was made, nothing really transpired publicly until the mid-70s, when all over the world was received a mysterious signal, sounded like a woodpecker, and it turned out that the Russians were utilizing microwaves and EMP frequencies to lift the ionosphere. And here we see the microwave antenna represented on the History Channel, which documented a lot of this. Again, lifting the ionosphere, which lifts the atmosphere. This has tremendous military potential and weather control opportunities. The ionosphere itself is an amazingly complex thing, and its relationship, like skin to muscles and body, is quite the scientific deal. But it affects everything from the out all the way down to the bottom. Gravity waves are a low-altitude cloud phenomenon. It was also found in World War II that if you could suffuse a region with a conductive powder, it would greatly increase the ability to transmit electromagnetic energy. And they made an artificial ionosphere utilizing conductive needles. But nothing really happened until the late 80s when, pressed by the breakthroughs of the Russians, we then came up with method and apparatus for altering a region in the Earth's atmosphere, ionosphere, and/or magnetosphere. It involved a number of applications, greatly increasing charged particle density, as well as the amazing abilities found in microwave interference generation. Indeed, they say right here, large regions of the atmosphere could be lifted to unexpectedly high altitude, weather modification by altering atmospheric wind patterns. The possible uses are fantastic and amazingly far-reaching. And this became the foundation for a great new level of breakthrough. In fact, desirable air molecules can be increased and undesirable compounds such as hydrocarbons can be eliminated. You don't hear much about that. But that's the capacity in this fantastic patent and the apparatus which was created to implement it. They can make a plasma sheath surrounding a missile, which could be used as a trigger for activating a high-intensity field to destroy the missile or satellite. So two beams, two effects brought to a point. They can interfere with the guidance systems employed by even the most sophisticated airplanes and missiles. Well, we should tell North Korea that. But most importantly, they can bring as much microwave energy in a nuclear bomb to any GPS point and altitude, and then they can maintain it by pulsing it indefinitely. Based on the fantastic implications of this patent, the facility called HAARP was built. This is a visual representation of the invisible high energies that they utilized there. But for 40 years, we've been told that it was for research only. Now, Governor Jesse Ventura went up there. He was ex-Navy SEAL. He had secret clearance when he was there. And this is the sign that's on the outside. It's so innocuous. A research observatory. That's all they are. There's kind of astronomers up there. So the sign itself, it's very plain what it implies, but that's not what's going on there for sure. But let's let the top guy tell us what was going on there. Dr. David Walker, a Deputy SecDef for Science, Technology, and Engineering. He's going to tell us exactly what's going on. Became the Deputy Chief Directorate of Global Power Programs. He continued in this. And then he went on to Wright-Patterson for the Air Force Research Laboratory, Director of Air Vehicles Directorate. That should raise a few eyebrows. Then he became Vice Commander of it, and then went on to rise to the position that we're going to see him in, where he makes his presentation to the Senate.
Thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it, and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there, and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere, be able to actually control it. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, be able to actually control it.
The senators didn't bother to ask the good doctor under what authority the Air Force was taking over management and control of the ionosphere. It was more enthusiasm, really. Prospects for a physics-based modification of global climate change. Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, the top applied physicist in the world, perhaps all of history, was brought out to make the presentation that what they needed to do was fill a layer of the atmosphere with aluminum oxide powder. But he had learned that they needed a good PR cover for something that big, but one had already been provided.
Our superheated oceans will rise, drowning our lowlands, leaving what's left of humanity baking in deserts that once fed the world.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Well, they weren't the only ones worried. Within 10 years of the HAARP patent itself, the Secretary of Defense warns us that others can alter the climate, set off earthquakes through the use of electromagnetic waves. It's real, and that's the reason we have to intensify our efforts. No doubt about that. So they dispatched Dr. Teller, premier applied physicist of the world, father of the hydrogen bomb, to address the World Federation of Scientists. In it, he said that there's no need to reduce hydrocarbon emissions, which is too expensive and unwieldy. All we have to do is introduce one layer of aluminum oxide in the atmosphere, which will reflect away sunlight and also form vast sheets of fall cirrus, which will actually reflect sunlight too, reducing the temperature. But the most important element of all, while the magnitude of the climatic impact of greenhouse gases is currently uncertain, he didn't believe in it, the prospect of severe failure of the climate is undeniable. Their goal, eliminate all climate failures. What does that mean? Full global weather control. How else are you going to control all climate failures? This was created then, the Global Weather Network, artificial weather. Why is the ionosphere important? Well, we've learned why. Other activities were embarked upon, the Hurricane Aerosol and Microphysics program, which involves aerosol, cloud seeding, these chemicals, and the use of electromagnetism to effectuate their usefulness. And but these are highly technical things we don't have to get dragged into. In fact, the whole scientific background is like a huge pyramid that towers over a city. It's so vast and dense, but we don't have to deal with it all. Because in reality, this fantastic edifice, this huge scientific structure, is in reality resting upside down on its tip. No matter how much science is involved, no matter how many disciplines, no matter how many opinions are involved, this fantastic structure rests on its tip. It rests like on a plate of hardened, depleted uranium. Even when we reduce it to the basis, it's still on its tip. And at the center of this, the official U.S. government and Department of Defense explanation is a single photograph. This is what the entire pyramid rests on. It all rests on this photograph. This is found in their official position, the aircraft contrails factory, condensation, water vapor trails. This is the position, and this was created in response to the outcry and alarms about these fantastic so-called persistent contrails. They tell us it's just water vapor and nothing but water vapor. An atmosphere layer that cannot absorb water vapor, the water vapor from the jet engine combustion will remain and not dissipate. And this is the photograph, the key photograph. You see that dissipating contrail and a big fatty? That's the controversy. And what do they tell us? Water vapor is the only thing involved, and the reason one is huge and the other goes away is because they're at different altitudes. They only look close. And at these different layers have different humidity amounts, and depends on how much humidity is there, whether it can absorb the water vapor or not. The entire controversy and all the science rests on this one photograph, this one statement about what is going on right here. But they left something out. They left out the rest of their sentence. They should have said, if the jets were at the same altitude, both would leave the same kind of trail. But they didn't want to do that because it would give a clue as to how to solve the problem. We'll let savvy say what we're all thinking. Sad fact, there may be more than one. Here we have something that was given out to all the school children across America, and the imprimatur of NOAA, NASA, with the proper representation of the sun causing the water to come up into clouds. And then we have the three main types of clouds: high altitude, mid altitude, and low altitude. In them are some of the major types that you would expect to see. Unfortunately, if you look up, you see two examples of the so-called persistent contrail, which are called clouds. And when you flip it over, here you have varieties of the different types of major clouds. Quite unusual, interesting. Here's where they should have had the contrails, but they didn't. They put them on the other side to make sure everybody thinks that they're a major cloud type, whether true or not. So let's look exactly what they're saying. At the base you have local water areas, which are then water vapors pulled up by the sun and form cumulus clouds, convective clouds. But once it reaches jet cruise altitude over 5 miles up, it all turns into a very wide, broad, thin layers. They're laminated. One layer can be very high in water content and cannot absorb the water vapor from a jet passing through, whereas right above it, 1,000 feet, it can still be low enough to absorb the water vapor. That's all they're talking about. So when one goes through, you see the fat trail. One just above it in a non-supersaturated region does not trail. Here we have jets trailing, persistent contrails or whatever, going into a very dense checkerboard of crisscrossed trails. There's another one nearby. And as we zoom, check, we see that there's another jet at looks to be identical altitude. Now, I attempted to measure the fuselages to see if they were at the same altitude, but it still doesn't remove doubt because you're not sure exactly what type of jet it is and exactly what altitude was involved. So the goal then is to prove exactly what altitudes they are and if they're identical. They should have both been trailing, but we want to do better than should. We want to prove it. So this is how it goes. All right, so based on their official position of NASA, NOAA, Air Force, the U.S. Weather Service, everybody, we have, this is a representation of what they're saying. You have a jet that trails and goes as a huge persistent contrail made of completely of water vapor, they say. Then you have one that vanishes quickly, like they illustrated, but that's actually 2,000 feet higher in a non-supersaturated layer. And down here you have the same thing where it's actually even a lower humidity, so that there's no trail whatsoever. That is their official explanation. They have left something out. This is what they left out. They should have said, if they're both at the same altitude and the same time, then both will exhibit a persistent contrail. So this is what we have now. If we can find examples where both are at, say, 36,000 feet, and one trails mightily, and the other one emits nothing or next to nothing, they're both at 36,000 feet, and roughly, if not exactly the same time, then it's all over. It's not water vapor. They have to do it. And also here, understand that if it was highly windy, choppy, then you might have blending or spreading. So what we really want is very calm air so that the humidity layer stays very, very constant at the altitude desired. Okay, now here's where it gets great, because this is the path, this is the way. You go to Plane Finder, zoom in, it'll show you every jet that's in the air that's non-military, and then go to the area where you are. Look for jets that are overflying in a lane and begin to check their altitudes, 37,000 feet. If you saw one trailing, then you would come in and look for another one coming along the same line. That way you can monitor exactly what altitudes they are and who's trailing and who's not. Doesn't get any simpler than that, my friends. Okay, so here we are. This is the procedure that is followed. Remember the demonstration of how to use Plane Finder. And so we're going to videotape all the specific jets. We're going for full identification of each jet, determination of precise altitude, and then we're going to go back outdoors and recheck the same plane, and we will verify the time for each plane, each jet tracked and filmed. So when we film it, we see the time. When we track it, we show the time. That's how you can do it. That's how I did it. That's rock solid. Okay, so. You know, thankfully, finally, after over 300 straight hours of overcast, it's clear. It's not going to be clear for long. Continuously overcast. There are no main deals at this moment in time. Even the squirrels are happy. You not love that. He's a sweet guy. Definitely. That's real dissipation. Alright, this is just great. See? Dissipating. There was another one over there dissipating. What does this look like? It's dissipating? Yeah. There it is. It's probably 38 to 40,000 feet as usual. And there it is. He just goes on and on and on and on and on. And how can it be water vapor? And that one's right there. So let's see if we can get both of these. All right. 356. Woo! You know, God, it's amazing, man. It is. Comes another one right here that's dissipating. All right, finally, to both of them being shown. See there, France. Oh, 36,000 feet. He was remarkably clear. All right, now who's the next guy? 38,000 feet. This guy was 36,000 feet, dissipating at 38. All right, feet, right there. Vertical speed, 0 feet per minute. And where was he from? From Paris to Mexico City. All right, so 36,000 feet, absolutely, positively must trail. And the trail went the whole length of the sky, so you can forget of moist air. All right, so there's Air France. And right here comes this guy at 36,000 feet. Just came right outside. We look up. There he is. There he is. That's him right there. He's dissipating. Perfect. Same altitude. All right. It's not doing that, is it? All right. That's it. Done deal. 404. Due west. Just ran in. That's the guy right there. Due west. Perfect. 36,000 feet. 0 feet per minute altitude change. The guy's exactly the same altitude as that Air France that just went over, which is right there. Isn't that great? Air France. And there's another one at UAL to Houston. 36,000 feet. 0 feet per minute change. Perfect. Let's see what he does. I bet you it's dissipating. How much you want to bet? Come on. Comes. Alright, December 7th. There he is, right there. Dissipating. Incredible. It's just so calm, it can't even be described. All right, we interrupt this to show you something really interesting. See, there's a jet, that is a trail from that 36,000 foot. This one right there. See him right there? He's totally right there, and he's doing nothing. That's the true nature of now. And maybe we can go in and plane finder that guy, see what his altitude is. But magnificent. Look, there we are, right there. Perfect. That's him right there. That's his line. That's where he is. Great. American Airlines at 34,000 feet. So rep this because I want to show you this. Hold on. Okay, on. Trail, 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 off in the goo. And there he is right there. See, it's very... Yeah, now he's doing nothing at all. Let's go check his altitude, shall we? Right. To that, right there. Okay, see him right there? Right there? That monster. Who is it? Perfect. Absolutely perfect. There's the flight path directly. See that? Right over me, just slightly to the left as we're looking up. And who is it? Everybody's favorite, U.S. Airways. From Newark to Charlotte. Altitude 34,000 feet. Ladies and gentlemen, just exactly the same path, exactly the same humidity. Everything as that American Airlines that emitted nothing is totally, well, it should be. It's not high enough, but it's consistent throughout because these mighty persistent contrails are forming uniformly across the sky if they were really persistent contrails. Now, the one that we saw, the American Airlines, was right between that big fatty and basically right along that shred. That shred that's expanding was the one that was emitted by U.S. Airways a minute ago at 34,000 feet. It also turned off and had no trail whatsoever coming out of it at certain parts of its flight, further indicating the artificiality problem. From Zurich approaching me at 40,000 is Edelweiss Air from Zurich to Tampa at 40,000, which is the preferred altitude for that 349, 350. Nice. Dual compounds. Yeah, see? The trails are separating. The backlight, I can't get detail on them, but you were hoping the Swiss weren't involved, weren't you? Well, it kind of violates the neutrality thing now, doesn't it? The Edelweiss one right there. Possible. Who's that? Ooh, 38,000 feet from New York to Charlotte. Let's go see if that guy's doing anything. Yep, he definitely did it. There it is. Yeah, it goes the whole way too. Yeah, and the one left by Edelweiss, see, they had dual compound, the magnetic powder, which disperses and vanishes quickly, relatively quickly. But then the cloud-making stuff continues and just hangs there. So two different types out of one, one engine. Come on, forget about it. And they both started. Well, oh, here's the jet right here. Let's go see. He's not doing anything. These both conveniently started right here, even though obviously the conditions are the same, and we've already seen that the humidity levels are hopelessly high. He's not. He's up there. Sorry about my handshake. It's just not as calm as I'd like it to be. Well, that's what happens when you reach 128 years old, They get a little bit of shake in there. Hey, I keep it quiet. Alright, so now that one started there, and that one started there. Fading for sure. Let's check his altitude, shall we? That could be another good catch, because we know that one was 40,000. What's he, if we can see him? Who wasn't trailing. Aeromexico at 40,000 feet. All right, that's a perfect catch. He's not trailing. The other one was at 40,000 feet. From Zurich. 40,000 is definitely not trailing. But the 40,000 foot one, that's still there. And we just saw Aeromexico go right along it, the exact same path within minutes of it, and left nothing whatsoever. So that's you can't get a better repudiation of the official government position that it's due to different altitudes. Some trail and others that appear near it don't. So much for that. And this is a fantastic example. This is what's left behind. The top one did a huge emission, and it was followed by another one. They both turned them on. One guy's, because you can see that, but the main thing is that we have a fantastic example of the separation into two compounds, because that one, this is what's remained after about 5 minutes after their passage. That is huge, and look what's happening to it. See, it's separating into two different kinds, and he's followed by that guy who just turned his on right there, but I want to show you that one. Yeah! So either one or the other was chemical, or both. But so now you can do it yourself, and that's what it's all about. You can just stop here and go do it as soon as you see them. However, we can take a look at some things that are explained now. First of all, we return to the EPA fact sheet, where they tell us that why do they grow? Not just be a thin trail, but why do they grow drastically in size? Well, they say newly formed ice crystals will continue to grow that come out of the jet by taking water from the vapor in the surrounding air. Well, that's tacitly absurd, because to require the size, those ice crystals would have to turn into beach balls. That's not going to happen. This is how it really happens. If it stays constant, the temperature stays constant, then the water vapor jumps out and it just stays there. It doesn't grow. The only way it can grow is for crystals to trigger reprecipitation out of the humid state, and that only happens when the temperature has dropped sharply, and that's very unusual. Here's an illustration of what the real principle is that's involved. Just as the air is saturated with water molecules, in this case this liquid is saturated, supersaturated, and at a high temperature, and then cooled dramatically. What happens then is when you take just one grain of the material that's dissolved in it, say sugar, and drop it into the supersaturated fluid, it causes a reaction is set up, which causes reprecipitation of all the dissolved material in crystalline form. As more crystals form, they serve as triggers for more and more and more until it all comes out, and this is, you're seeing it happen right here. One crystal has already produced this hemisphere that's expanding as the crystals continue to trigger the reaction throughout the entire solution, and that's what a true spreading water vapor trail would do. But those conditions are very rarely met. But this shows you this is what the real cause is, and it shows you that the EPA fact sheet is pretty much less than worthless. But even here we're left with a mystery. Why did it just start and stop? Why not go a much further distance? Well, here's where we find clues. You look at supersaturated regions where there are trails, and what do we find? They're all 80 to 100 miles long, and never more over continental land masses. This is exactly what we would expect if there were a finite amount of material on board. But they don't, and you can check day after day on NASA Worldview and find the same thing. Where there are trails, no matter how large the cirrus area may be, they're never more than 80 to 100 miles long. Ever. Of course, they should go the entire length of the supersaturated region. If one's there and one's a little further on in the same region, they should both have gone the whole region. We look over here in Europe, near the Alps, 250 miles of supersaturated cirrus. Cirrus requires supersaturation. Supersaturation, they're all 80 to 100 miles long. No jet goes all the way to 36,000 feet just to cruise there for 80 miles. Now we can finally begin to understand why these are cut off and cut on. It's because there's a finite amount of material on board. You can definitely and often have supersaturated layer that's free of any clouds. But in this case, you see a little blob of cirrus, and that trail on the left, the fuselage can be seen cutting through it. All the anomalies that we see all the time, and more that aren't even captured here, have now been fully accounted for when we understand that what's causing it is not water vapor. But is there anything else that shows what they are? Well, we return to the EPA, and we don't know where this material in rain and snow comes from. Well, we have a pretty firm clue here. These are typical samples, and virtually every time when they're dried, rain or snow is dried, this is all rain. Notice the shellac in there. My personal favorite, nanofibers, and this is a pretty sparse distribution. That's dried snow. Snow used to be the source of distilled water before they became commercially viable. And then at times we have this strange plastic-like material that falls out of the sky, and the only thing that I have found that comes close to it isn't pollen. It's this. What would they want, the U.S. Air Force, with artificial pollen? Well, we look a little more, and we find that they can take spiky pollen, coat it with thin metal, magnetic, and then heat it so that the vegetal material is destroyed, leaving perfect replicas for what they say are adhesion purposes. What adhesive could this serve? Well, when we return right back to the same place, which is where we recall in its almost innumerable applications and claim benefits, that they can introducing an aerosol into a region and then bombarding that region with their microwave magic charges all of the particles, which causes them to become adhesive and can cling to the fuselage of, say, intercontinental ballistic missiles to slow them down and alter their trajectory. They can also then be destroyed by introducing another microwave to that object. So that's the probable application. But regardless of the depth of the science and the amazing applications and potentials here, we learned that everything reduces to its primary position. This huge edifice is actually upside down, rests on its point, which itself rests on the official government explanation based on water vapor and different altitudes, which is what we just proved. So, since it is not water vapor, therefore it must be chemical.